Welcome back again. Good morning, team.
Good morning, Kim Dew.
Good morning from the audience also. Here, we are very glad to have you with us, although through the screen, but many, many thanks for your sacrifice to get up early to be with us instead of sending a video. So we appreciate very much. Okay, so you can see the president there, over there. I see him on a small screen, but you have the advantage of seeing him in the big screen behind me. So welcome team, and very much appreciate to have you with us. And then very much looking forward to listen to your sharing with us. The talk of team is healers and healing. And I would pronounce a few words to introduce team to you, to the audience, despite the fact that he's well known by all of us and in the world, because he stands for all of us and each of us representing the Theosophical Society International. Now, a few words needs to be pronounced to remind to us, all of us, what he has been doing and he's still doing. Tim has served as international president since 2014. And previously he was president of the TS in America and president of the Theosophical Order of Service in the US. During his tenure, he has focused on developing approaches to applying the wisdom teachings. Since coming to Adyar, a priority has been upgrading the Adyar campus, renovating and repurposing the aging buildings and infrastructure, and initiating collaborative management system for TS administration. This is great. In addition to the renewed attention to the long-standing Olcott School Social Welfare Center, Vocational Training Center, and Besant Memorial Animal Dispensary, a new school is specifically Theosophical educational approach was founded last year, the Adyar Theosophical Academy. In 2015, an annual multi-day strategic planning meeting was begun with a view to making Theosophy an active force globally and within the TS. The General Council and other active TS members participate in these meetings. It is also great. Now he is a founding member of a Chicago spiritual community which worked with troubled youth, taught meditation and healing methods, and established organic food gardens on vacant lots. He was responsible for the TSA sponsoring the Dalai Lama visit to Chicago in July of 2011. The two memorable day event attended by 10,000 people. I was very happy to be one among those 10,000 people and to take this turning point as a big event for the evolution of our TS. Tim, we are very glad to hear you, to listen to you, and really to looking forward to be enriched with your sharing on the subject of healers and healing. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kim Dew. Thank you for the introduction. One little correction is that I must have. Anyway, the school at Adyar is now 3 years old, the Adyar Theosophical Academy. So that's something that we're quite happy about. Good to see all of you, and in fact, I do see all of you. because you're on the screen here. So please do not start to go to sleep as I speak. I will see every one of you. I'm very happy to be at this event. It's been a long time coming, of course. 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, we were supposed to be at this meeting. I am told that the birth process for an elephant, which is the longest in the animal kingdom, only takes 2 years. The Theosophical conference takes 3. So it's something bigger than an elephant. But it's good to be here again. I wanted to talk a little bit about a subject that keeps coming back to me because I think it's a very important one. And I think it's also one that is largely overlooked within much of our theosophical thinking and certainly within the teachings. Even though the Theosophical Society, since its beginning, members of the Theosophical Society have been very active in healing work. And for those of you who are familiar with Key to Theosophy, HPB talks about the need for healing at many, many different levels. But you know, when we talk about it, it would be good to ask a couple of questions of ourselves before we even get into the subject. And the first one that I think is important would be, what is, when we say healing, what is it? Oftentimes we think about doctors. I know that used to be the extent of my thought at one point. But what is healing? And if we get right down to the actual meaning of the word, it's not about specific processes. It's not about methods that are employed in different healing communities. What it talks about is, its root meaning is to make whole, to make complete. So what its focus is upon fragmentation and its effects. So in the act of healing, what we are talking about is the restoration of wholeness. And so, of course, what does that even mean? How is it possible? I have hands, I have legs, I have eyes. How can I not be whole? What does it mean? And so for that, probably, this is where we start to turn to the ageless wisdom perspective of what, in fact, is a human being and how it would be possible for one to regard themselves as not being complete in that respect. Ageless wisdom tradition, as we know, speaks of the human being in terms of 7, particularly the theosophical approach to it, 7 interpenetrating planes of consciousness, from the highest spirit all the way to what we would describe as lowest matter. Highest spirit, lowest matter, both being beyond the possibility of our perception. But how is it that within this view of the human being, that we can speak of ourselves as being somehow incomplete, fragmented? And as we know, much of the focus of this theosophical work, while it is pointed toward truth, while it is pointed toward spirit, the real work that we find ourselves having to do is always related to what we would describe as the personality, the body, the sensations, the emotions, the mind, particularly in its lower uses, its less refined uses. That's where we end up doing the work. Nothing need be done for the spirit. Nothing need be done for the soul. So when we speak in terms of this path that we pursue, it seems to be related to the refinement of this instrument, which is also an obstacle to our wholeness. So this dominance of the personality is really what it is that we end up working with. 7 interpenetrating planes of being, but in terms of our normal function, somehow they are unequally active. And probably that's not even a correct way of saying it. It's not that they are unequally active, it's probably more that they are not integrated in their activity. And so we end up with a major part of our focus from moment to moment, day to day, is on the personal aspect, which, our fascination and our deep involvement with that prevents us from seeing perhaps something deeper, creates this kind of fragmented person that we are. I often find myself talking about, one of those points that has become very clear to me, particularly over time, which is the idea that major part of what is the human predicament, the issues which we find ourselves having to deal with from day to day, is a result of this process of identification and taking on of identities. Many of you who have heard me speak have often heard me talk about this process, which begins really at birth, where a soul inhabits a body. And from that moment, we start forming a variety of identities. First it's gender, when you're pronounced male or female, and so on. We take on religions, we take on nationalities, we identify ourselves with that. And in that process, we separate ourselves from a broader possibility. And we fight for these identities. And we cultivate desires based on these identities that we have come to regard as us. So this is this process of fragmentation, that we separate ourselves from what is probably, what could be described as the central truth of our being, that all is one, that this is in fact a universal brotherhood, a universal kinship that we all share, but rarely recognize. And that's a cause for, a great deal of suffering. And the conditions that we find ourselves facing very often are related to this very same thing. HPB made a comment in this regard. You hear it and then take it for what it's worth. In speaking about this process of fragmentation, she made a very profound comment that whatever plane our consciousness is acting in, for the time that it is acting in that plane, only that plane and ourselves, that's the only reality. So when we are fixated on anything, that becomes our reality. She was talking about it in a very broad and profound sense, but it's something we're all very much aware of. I mean, I have witnessed for myself and seen videos, of someone fixated on their cell phone screen, walking into a pond of water and not even being aware of it. I mean, we've all seen things. We probably have even done it ourselves if we're really truthful. But I've also known people sitting in the most peaceful of environments who, for some reason, something triggered a memory of some stressful or pain-causing event, and even in the most peaceful of surroundings, found themselves reliving this torturous moment. Whatever plane it is that our consciousness is functioning, that is our reality. You know, part of the basis of biofeedback is the idea to give sensory connection to the internal states so that we can actually develop some control over it. You know, in the biofeedback practice, you know, it became very clear that a person could imagine their hand becoming very hot. And through the exercise of consciousness, the temperature, the physical temperature in the hand could be tested and seen that it rises, all through the direction of consciousness. It's something that became very, very valuable in cancer treatment because it was found that the immune system could be stimulated through visualization of the white cells attacking the cancer cells. And they had found that this heightens the immune system process. So consciousness in all of this is key, really. And that's something that we can never forget. So what is it then, in terms of a return or a restoration to wholeness, in terms of a healing, what is it that we find our consciousness focused on? In other words, what is it that is our reality? And if we were really to just do a brief check of the normal thoughts that occupy our attention, that occupy our conversations, that occupy our thinking and our focus, you know, what might that be? I mean, if we are consumers of normal news broadcast, at least in the United States, when I move around, nowadays there is conversation related to a new fear. Now, often people speak about their fears, focus on them. So the fears of inflation, economic inflation, shortages. There's definitely some anxiety in the air that is focused on about war and discord among us. There's concern, you know, on a normal person, particularly someone who is a member of the Theosophical Society, because it seems like many of us do have a lot of gray. We focus on our health. These are the sorts of concerns. We focus on the health of others. Everybody has relationship issues of various types. We're concerned about people's behavior. What's the meals we're going to prepare? What's the food we're going to eat? Household needs. It's a host of thoughts. It's a focus that is very clear, but the chief characteristic of all of this variety of concerns is that it is the consciousness operating on a plane whose main characteristic is a focus on the self, the personality, and its fears, its desires, and its needs. And this continuous focus, unless it is something that is seen and first augmented with an alternative direction, the whole point of meditation is to interrupt this cycle, which is a cycle of continuous fragmenting or separation, to allow for the experience of something of a more unifying character. Mainly, the focus is to allow us to see something more profound, more deep, more present, more real. And in that seeing, there is the possibility for release. But this process that we engage in focuses on the fragment, which, we each call me, independent of the whole within which we are said to live, move, and have our being. So in terms of healing, there are many maladies, there are many symptoms of this larger condition of separation that can be addressed. But it is more, at its deepest level, it is more than just the correcting of a condition in the physical body. At its deepest level, healing is the restoration of the sense of connection to an unfragmented self. It presents that possibility. So when we talk about healing, when we talk about healers, probably the greatest healers have been the ones such as Buddha, Jesus, the ones that we know of. Actually, Krishnamurti, he never made a point of it, really, but for conscious reasons. But he is known for having performed profound healings of very, very difficult physical conditions. But he didn't want that to be the focus for the people who he came to speak to, because for him, he felt it might be distracting from a deeper message. So it's not just about the correction of physical conditions, because, the fact is that the greatest healers who have ever lived have also died of some condition. It's just the nature of physical matter that it exists and it also comes apart. I mean, that's just what it is. But it is possible for its vibrancy and its longevity to be extended. So that's just a background about my view of this healing process and the root cause of the various issues. Now, when it comes to actual healing, probably it would be best just for me just to talk a little bit about some healers that I have known, one historically, and a couple of them who have been quite profound in terms of their abilities to heal. I was first really exposed to the idea of healing, even though I came from a family where a number of my uncles were doctors. Somehow or another, I never really made the connection between medicine and actual healing as a youth. My first real exposure to healing of an energetic type was when I first came in contact with a gentleman who would be a profound mentor for me in years to come. I can just describe what that was. I visited with the gentleman for the first time. He was a member of the Theosophical Society. and highly regarded, particularly among many of the younger people in the Chicago area. I was just visiting. And at the time, there was a person there who was listening to this gentleman talk. His name was Bill Lawrence, who had a very severe headache, apparently. And I never will forget how I was first being exposed to this, someone talking about the ageless wisdom. And in the middle of this talk, Bill Lawrence asked Al about his headache. Apparently you're not feeling well. What's going on, Al? The fellow said, I'm having a headache. I never will forget how Bill Lawrence, who we came to call the old man, called on two of his students and said, please, guys, would you take Al's headache? They put a chair in the middle of the floor. One stood in front, one stood behind. They rubbed their hands together without touching him, just held their hands on each side of his head, and then just stood there for maybe 30 seconds, a minute. When they finished, they shook their hands and went back and sat down. For all appearances, I had seen nothing. I saw two people stand up and I saw them sit down. But the thing was that Al, this fellow, was clearly quite relieved. So that was my first exposure. In years to come, I spent 13 years living in a community that we created with Bill Lawrence, the old man. And over the years, I came to see many really profound healings take place and to meet some very profound healers. So that was my first exposure that let me know that there was something to this. I didn't know what it was, but as time went on, come to find out that it was something that is a natural ability for anyone. In the Theosophical Society's history, although it doesn't get as much attention as I think maybe it should, Colonel Olcott spent about 3 years working in what was then called Ceylon. Now it's Sri Lanka. And his work there was really to revive Buddhism, because the Catholic Church and the colonial forces were trying to suppress this religion and this approach that was the norm for Ceylon at that time. And they were being quite successful in suppressing it. Colonel Olcott, who is, still regarded as something of a hero in that country, the statues, the universities named after him, he was working to revive it. But at a certain point, it was made known that the Christian missionaries had discovered a well of water that would heal people, but it would only heal them in the name of Jesus. So Olcott, on hearing this, went to the Buddhist monks that he was working with and told them, look, you cannot just allow these missionaries to take over the whole field of healing. You have to do some healing. And when they all declined, Olcott, being the person that he was, said, well, okay, then I will do it. He had had some exposure to the practice of mesmerism. Anton Mesmer had been a huge force earlier on in that century. And while he was in America, Olcott had been exposed to that, and he had practiced some with it. The healing method related to what was called then animal magnetism. In the Theosophical parlance, it would be something like projection of etheric or vital energy. So Alcott took it on himself to begin to do some healing. He had never tried it really. So he began with a person who had a paralyzed arm. And he worked on that arm one day. The person came back the next day, said he had had great relief. Alcott said it boosted his confidence. And then he continued the process the next day with the result that the arm that had been paralyzed became completely usable. The word spread, and then over the course of the next 3 years, there were crowds anywhere Alcott went, demanding, requiring healing. And he worked on them. And Alcott was a man who kept records of everything. So during the course of those 3 years, he documented 7,000 cases of people whose conditions were ameliorated, were bettered, or were even completely healed as a result of the work he was doing. And it included such things as paralysis, blindness, all sorts of pain. So that was the work that he ended up doing. And he talked about the 2 methods that he employed in his healing. The first method was that he would invoke the presence of his master. He said really that the greatest healings that he did were using this particular method. And, there are even cases of one particular person who was blind when Alcott was working on him, and he was describing a figure that he was seeing standing in front of him. And he described in great detail what was known as the features of Alcott's master. And his blindness, of course, was reversed. The other method that he employed was the method that H.P.B. spoke about and that is spoken of in the Mahatma letters, where he would use his will to accumulate and then to project this energy into the varying parts of the body that were in need of it. This is the method of Anton Mesmer and others. So these were Alcott's approaches, and he had to stop doing this healing work because it was taking all of his time and his energy. But he was a great healer and quite well known for that. In the United States, many of you are aware of someone who became the president of the Theosophical Society in America, but had her beginnings in the Dutch East Indies, Dora van Gelder Kuntz, who was really her main gift was the gift of, she was born clairvoyant. And I knew Dora very well over the years. I remember at one time doing an interview with her, and she was known for her clairvoyance. She worked particularly with the medical community in describing conditions of the human aura and how it indicates health, disease, and also higher states as well. But she was one of the people who went from her home, and she was living for a period at the manor in Australia when Leadbitter was there. And I remember doing an interview with her one time, and the point had been made that Leadbitter helped to train her with her clairvoyance, which, in the interview, she said that that's really not the way it happened. That she had this clairvoyant ability, and then when she went to the manor, Leadbitter was ill for a while. And as a young girl, he assigned to her his correspondence. He had people writing to him from around the world, and he was responding to all of these letters. But when he was ill, he had her to do it. So she said at a very young age, she had to think, she came in contact with very deep human problems that she had to call upon some deeper resource to answer. But anyway, she became quite involved in healing. There were some very pronounced healers that she was looking at, she had been with, and she was trying to regard how it is that they do what they do. And she would speak with them and ask them about whether they believed it was possible for others to heal as they did. And almost all of them would say no, that their healing was a gift from God, and that it's something that if you don't have it given, you can't get it. But she didn't believe that. And so when she watched what they were doing, she went on to develop a method of healing that she could train others in doing. Really, the transmission of energy is how she saw it, because she could see the energetic patterns during the process of healing. So she worked with this, and then during her time at the Pumpkin Hollow camp in New York, she and Dolores Krieger, who was a professor of nursing at New York University, evolved this system, which came to be known as therapeutic touch. Dora and Dolores Krieger brought that to New York University. It came to universities in other parts of the world. More than 100,000 nurses have been trained in this energetic approach to healing. I have worked with Dora because it used to be that every Wednesday evening at the Theosophical Center, she would have a group of nurses and others come in, and she would train them in the use of this therapeutic method. And its basis is really simple. It assumes that basically the human being is an energetic system, and that everyone is constantly in touch with these energies, continually has access to these energies, but it can be focused through a process that is available to anyone who can become what she described as centered. In Dora Kuntz's method of healing, the first step is what she would call centering, which is essentially we pull ourselves away from this broken condition of consciousness that is continually focusing on each of the day's problems and the normal fascination we have. We withdraw from that to our, what she would describe as a center. So basically, we become quiet. And in that process of quieting, our own energies start to harmonize. I mean, this is the experience that anyone who sits for meditation has on a regular basis. With that centering, then the next thing is we cultivate what we would describe as the intention to heal. And again, part of the self-training that we undergo is the recognition that this healing is in no way a personal matter. That the energies involved are not the property of anyone. It's a natural condition of ourselves as human beings that we can become available to the flow of energies rather than just confining it and creating these problems that we normally do by just constantly focusing on ourselves. So this flow can begin with this intention for this healing energy to flow through us. And that's the process in a nutshell. And what she found was that this was something that could be taught. This is something that could be trained. It's something that over time and with exposure, people could become much more proficient in this healing process. I do remember on one occasion, someone had come to Dora who had on one of these Wednesday evenings, and they were having some sort of nerve difficulty. They had some sort of damage to one of their legs that had restricted the flow of energy in those nerves. And during those Wednesday evenings, people would come and you would work on different people, but there were certain people that Dora would take to work on. And this gentleman was one of those cases because she felt it was a more difficult one. For whatever reason, on that particular evening, she asked me to work with her. And one of the things Dora would say to the people she trained in her healing methods was, look, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to describe the process. Do that. Don't do what I do. Because she saw more, so she did things rather differently. But what she taught was something that could be reliable. But on that particular day, she says, Tim, could you help me with this? And so she asked me to take my hands and put them on his foot, which I did. And the idea was that, in a sense, it would draw the energy down through that leg and into the earth. So she started to work from above, and I had my hands on his foot. And we were doing this for about, a couple of minutes, and Dora started to say, well, you should probably be feeling something in that leg now. And the fellow responded that he felt nothing. And she continued, she says, you should be feeling something at this point. And he says, no, I don't feel anything, which is when she looked down at me. And then Dora could shout. She says, not that foot, the other foot. I was holding the wrong foot the whole time. So when I switched feet and the process continued, the man was just amazed at the feeling and the sensation that was restored for the time being in that leg. But this flow of energy is something that she taught, and it's something that she felt was something that anyone could do. So the question, one of the questions that would come up, and one of the questions that perhaps we can ask ourselves, all this is good for Dora or for some nurses to engage in this process. Many of these nurses, the only theosophy they were exposed to was the idea of the human being as an energy system, but they could heal. So, is it possible for me, whoever we are, to be a healer? The way I have come to look at this, within our theosophical world, I have become convinced, mainly by what I have experienced and what I have seen, that anyone who wholeheartedly embraces anything that we can describe as a spiritual path necessarily becomes a healer. It doesn't mean that you're using a therapeutic touch method or any method. We become a focus for the possibility of the experience of peace. As we experience that, It's something that necessarily shares itself. It spreads abroad. As we experience deepening awareness of that we are not separate from one another, of the reality of this nucleus of a universal brotherhood and the universal brotherhood within which it functions, it becomes something that is powerful. And people begin to seek out your presence. For each of us, I know for me, there are people in my life who in times of crisis, I can pick up the phone or I can go to see them. And I want to see them. Why? Because in their presence, there is a sense of safety, a sense of peace. And this is the transformation that occurs. So whether it's in a family, you become a center of peace. You become the one that breathes the possibility of wholeness. You become a healer. But these are matters that are really matters of choice, like so many things. Am I a healer? That's really something that's up to us. Do I choose the fragmented state of continuous personal involvement? Or do I opt for another possibility? Our chores, our relationships will always be there. They won't change. But how we see them and how we interact with them can change in a way that creates a condition of wholeness in our families, in our friends, in our relationships. So it's something that really is up to us. There is a quote from a woman, Mary Baker Eddy, actually. She was the founder of the Christian Science movement, which is focused really on the healing from the mind basis. But many great healings occurred in that particular field. But she made the point that at a point can come for us where we become conscious. And in that state of awareness, we find that we will never enter an inharmonious place without the intention to purify it. That can mean a lot of things. That in our normal thinking, the inharmonious place of fear, of changes that we see, fear of pandemic, fear of economic inflation. We enter that inharmonious place only with the intention to purify it. This is the healer's mentality. So the greatest healing along this line is really the healing of the condition that HPB spoke of. I find myself coming back to it continually. That the greatest condition that is needed to be healed within us and within those around us is this condition H.P. Blavatsky described as the heresy of separateness. The idea of which we are so deeply convinced that we are separate from one another and from all other things, that we are an independent entity, is a heresy, is the way she described it. It's one that becomes disproved in this process of healing healing really is a spiritual practice at its root, because it confirms our unity. It confirms that the energies that flow through you flow through me, and that these are things that we have some control in interacting with. So, just a few thoughts about healing and healers. And I hope it's something that for each of us, we will find our part in it and become really the healer that we are intended to be. So I want to thank you for inviting me. I want to thank you, Kim Dew.
Thank you very much, the team, for your sharing, telling us many examples which enrich our knowledge about the history of our society on that field of healers and healing. It was remarkable. Dora Kunz and her work.
Yeah.
I have the opportunity to meet her twice in Adyar, and really very inventive and very sensitive. Now, by your sharing, we learn a lot from the examples of the healers and the healing. And one point very important is that we can discover that we can be a healer, depending upon what we want or not. And it is a big revelation, saying thank you for this. And it opened our mind towards something unusual, that we think that we can be healed, that we cannot be healers. We can be. And of course, the answer is yes, no. And thank you for this. Are you available to take some questions?
Certainly.
Tim, I've not had a GP doctor, physician for 36 years. And I just wondered, do you think as a theosophist, we should be moving towards becoming our own physician?
Okay. There is the statement, healer, heal thyself. And obviously the only one, the greatest healer, is the consciousness. So mainly our focus is on cultivating that. I mean, if you begin with accepting certain basic facts, one is that the body has an expiration date. So the main part of healing isn't about the preservation of the body, but about the opportunity to use the time that we have in this body to cultivate a deeper aspect, a connection with what's described as the soul. So, that's the real healing process. And each one has the opportunity to do that, whether we take it or not. So for people who are involved in this kind of theosophical approach, who feel that there is value to establishing a deeper connection with a higher self, then yes, it's a role of healing ourselves from the illness of separation.
Just one last thing. In Europe this year, there was unveiling of the first human representation of the body's fascial system with the connecting tissue. And this is a real breakthrough in science. And I think, although I'm no expert, there is a relationship between our higher self and this new discovery of the fascial network.
Could you say a little bit about what is the fascial?
It's from the base of the sole of the foot to the top of the head. It's like the super highway of information. It's like our body's internet. And for example, if we do Tai Chi yoga, the integrity of the fascial system is kept intact. Otherwise, if the fascial system collapses, you can then start to feed a tumor, or this type of understanding of illness and well-being. So this is very, very new, and I just feel, in relation to the third object, this could be looked at, or it will be looked at in the future. The science and theosophy come together, as we go forward.
Yeah, I think this is again, this is science coming up to date with ageless and ancient wisdom teachings. The whole idea that we are an energetic system, the idea of the chakras, the idea of the meridians, which has been expressed in cultures around the world and worked with, is rooted in this idea that there is, there's one system, that the human body is just a cell within a greater body, and that this communication process is it's undivided. And I think that's probably a very big discovery for the scientific community.
Tim, would you say for effective healing at any level, there are always healing angels involved, but the more impersonal the intention, in other words, attaching yourself to the highest level, you're not thinking of self, the greater flow of healing comes forward because it's impersonal in nature.
Yeah, that is correct. I think very often we don't do a lot of talking about the devas, for instance. Jeffrey Hodson was very strong on the devas of the healing art, in terms of within every act of healing, it's not just an isolated transfer from one person to another, that we live in a universe of omnipresent intelligence at a variety of levels. And that as we focus, I mean, part of what Dora did, without even talking about it, was you center, which means you become more still, you become less personalized. You don't have to be aware of the agencies that are attracted by that. And then that is there's an energy that is projected, but there's also an intelligence that accompanies this entire process. And that the healing takes place within this broader spectrum. If you think of it as the energies that's coming from your hand, it still is effective. If you are aware of the energy from other intelligences, Devic intelligences that are cooperating, it has perhaps a broader effect. In the Mahatma letters, there's this example of one of the Mahatma's locks of hair. He gave it to Sinnett so that he could assist in the health of his son. He had a son, Denny, who had bad health from birth. And, he made the comment that the hair itself, all it does, it contains the energy from the person whose head it came from. But there needs to be a connection made between the object, the energetic object, and the person in need. And that the deepest connection that can be made is when one has the capacity to connect with what he described as buddhi, the universalized consciousness of the human being. Then a power comes through that is profound. The object serves as a focus for the attraction of other levels of intelligence, each one having a greater capacity in this healing process. So that's also a level of consciousness that, as someone who is a theosophist, someone who has put some time into the study of these things and experimented with it, you have a deeper capacity for healing because there are deeper elements of your own being you can call upon.
Dora meditation used to connect us with nature. Do you see a problem today for society that we seem to have become so disconnected from the natural world?
Oh, of course, it's a huge problem.
Cause for our suffering and illnesses.
Of course. I mean, one of the things that you find, it's one of those just known facts for people who have studied this sort of thing. But when you think in terms of mystical experience, which is to say people who have the experience of moving beyond the personal and connecting with some universal consciousness, that almost always those are things that happen in a natural setting. Streams, mountainsides, the people who report those sorts of things. But also the patterns of nature are harmonious, stable. When you think about the human created patterns that we all tend, particularly if we live in a city, the ones that we function within, they're not stable in the same sense. They are, they're street lights that we respond to, that we're changing. There's light on at times that are not normal for the human body's function. All sorts of patterns we have created that we live within, and they have their effects. Very often people just make sure they take time to resource, take a walk in the park. And it has a physiological effect that has been demonstrated. So yes, the natural world is perhaps the more ideal setting. I know in the Mahatma letters, there's that letter about, I think it was KH, who went to one of the cities to do some work. He says, I won't return because the patterns are so chaotic that it is jarring to our system. We have just become desensitized. And in that desensitizing process, we have lost many things. And it has affected our health. And will continue to, but it does seem that for the present, the work that we really have to do is not on the mountaintop, but right where the greatest need is to be found. So most of us find ourselves today living in and through city settings. And in part, I think, even though it's more demanding, that part of the function we serve is to create these islands of peace, healing islands, you could say, in the midst of this chaotic environment. That possibility has to remain there and has to become strengthened. And even though it takes a toll on the individual, that's where the work is to be found. It's no longer, now it's not running away to the mountaintop. Now it would be running away. In a previous time, it was just a natural extension of a person's life, but that's not the work for us.
There is another question from America.
Thank you for this inspirational talk. I just wanted to ask, what would you suggest for someone who would like to know more about those healing processes like Dora Kunz or Hudson did?
Yeah. Well,
Are there something we can read or some material to prepare?
there's a body of literature. I mean, for the Deva kingdom, I think Jeffrey Hodson wrote an excellent book on what was that book? The Kingdom of the Gods, or was that the one with the, okay. So that one, he actually has a invocation for healing, which invites the angels of healing. You know, hail devas of the healing art, come to our aid, is the way it begins. And then that's something that you can work with. With therapeutic touch, there are a couple of very good books. The name to look for is Dolores Krieger, Dolores, and then her last name is Krieger. It will take you through the actual practice, the method, and then there are groups that you can connect with, certainly in Europe and in the United States, I know as well. So that'd be a place to start.
Okay. Another question over there.
Hello, Tim, and thank you for a very interesting lecture just now. You mentioned that science might be catching up with theosophy. I have a scientific background, and I would just like to mention the process by which you talked about somebody putting his or her hand on someone's knee, perhaps to get rid of a pain in the leg. But I've been thinking about this for some time now, for many years. Quantum physics now may have the answer to what you're talking about. Because when you go down to the very small, the atomic scale, our image of particles, like atoms and protons and so on, disappears. And it now becomes a wave rather than a particle, which is a vibration, a wave which is a vibration. And now quantum physicists now believe that the position of particles, the position of our bodies and so on, we're surrounded by a vibrational energy field. And although we're not conscious of this on our everyday level of existence, that may be what's happening on the microscopic scale when you talk about healers passing energy from the energy field onto a recipient. It does make sense on a quantum level. So there may very well be a scientific explanation for what Theosophists have always known. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah. I am in touch with some of the people who are active in this therapeutic touch community, and during the pandemic, it was an interesting time for them because they used to meet regularly and they would have their sessions, you know, with people in person. During the pandemic, they couldn't do that. And so they were forced to then do their healing work at a distance. And still they found it was effective. So it's something that really expanded the view even of the those people who were involved in healing, that it is not something that is dictated by locality, which is also another thing that quantum physics speaks to, the non-local nature of phenomena.
You just mentioned a very interesting point. Nuclear physicists were able to take two particles from an atom and remove one of them to New York and keep the other particle in London. And when they made the one particle in London change some physical aspect of its property, there was an instantaneous change in the particle in New York. And as you said, this is called non-locality, which I'm afraid physicists haven't got an answer for at the moment. They just know that it happens.
Mm.
All right. Daniele?
Hello, Tim. It's Daniela from Italy.
Hello, Daniel.
Hello. So the theme of the Congress is healing oneself and healing the world, which, I mean, in a non-separated way, a way of looking at things, of course, are the same thing, as you said. So you talked about the fact that the main point of healing, of the process of healing, is not about the conservation of the physical body, but it's an opportunity to create a connection with the soul and with the higher self. But at the same time, we've made some examples of healing other people and healing other people in terms of, restoring the health of their physical body. So I would like to kindly ask you to elaborate a bit on the deeper meanings of healing other people. I don't know if it makes sense, but, because how, in other words, if for a single individual, the deeper meaning of healing is to restore the connection with the soul and the higher self, what is the deeper meaning of helping other people restoring first their bodily conditions, if you know what I mean?
Sure. One of the things that is undeniable for us is that in many ways our mental functioning, our emotional attitude is very strongly linked to the body's health. Mahatma Gandhi made the statement that to a starving man, a piece of bread is the face of God. So at a variety of levels, when we are ill, when our body's functioning is either causing us pain or limiting the pain that we feel from being limited, that's something that restricts very often our ability to connect with others. And so the alleviation of that pain is something that is, in a way, a first step toward a deepening connection with others. One of the things that we're seeing too much of is the effects of war and all that brings with it on the relationship abilities of people who are exposed to that. We're not talking about the harm done to limbs, although that's there, but the harm that's done to our ability to connect with others through this exposure to such extreme violence and non-human, it's unnatural behavior that we have too easily taken for granted. So, that level of healing is so important because, again, the whole source of our illness is, and I'm not, talking about physical illness is a part of the illness process, and it's not the most important part. I have known people who have been deeply ill physically, but whose minds and whose hearts were so outgoing toward others that, for whatever reason in their case, the body, even though it was causing them substantial problems, wasn't their main concern. So that possibility exists. In the Theosophical literature, there's this statement we all hear and hear over and over again, that compassion is not an attribute, it is the law of laws. Compassion begins with the recognition of the suffering of another. So it has this capacity to expand the field of our awareness to another. There are people whose compassion is great for their families, that's normal. But there are other souls who somehow or another are unable to embrace the nation, the world. Buddha's, the way he described himself was as a doctor. He was here to minister to the illness of humanity. not by healing bodies, which he did, but by this greater extension. And so this practice of healing actually moves us into this law of law, which is compassion, to relieve the suffering of others and to expand our capacity to do that. You know, some would say that's what we're here for. In Mahayana Buddhism, the idea is that we are here, we embrace this path in order to gain enlightenment. That's something that's typical to all Buddhism. But in Mahayana Buddhism, we embrace this path in order to gain enlightenment for the benefit of others, and really at its deepest level for the benefit of all beings. So it's this, you know, it's this great projection of a goal that in ways we move ourselves toward, and it begins with the ability to connect with the person who is in front of me, to acknowledge, to recognize where suffering exists, and at the minimum, don't be a source of greater suffering. That's a beginning. And then beyond that, as our capacity develops, we are able to be a source of actual relief of suffering. We can relieve that suffering through our quiet listening. We can relieve that suffering through a capacity we develop to radiate energy from our hands or even from our minds or from a distance. But as with many things, it is something that develops with practice. You know, anyone who thinks that, you know, their abilities as a healer, as a meditator, are going to drop out of the sky suddenly, it just doesn't work that way. This whole idea of spirituality, unless there is some sort of practice to express it that is connected to it, it's just talk. You know, it's nice ideas, but it's just talk. So, you know, this is one of those practices. And you can find the level at which you feel comfortable with it. To heal, to interact with the suffering of the world. Healing ourselves is healing others.
Now, there are still 3 more questions. One is coming now on live, and 2 others coming from online, and then another one sent beforehand. So let us hear the gentleman over there. Yes, please.
Hello. I hope you don't mind if my question is not related to healing or healers. Mine is a simple question. Why is the world in such a bad state in spite of the efforts of the Theosophical Society and many other similar societies to create international brotherhood? Thank you.
That's one of those good questions. You know, I remember, I think it was Rupert Sheldrake, he's a theosophist and a scientist. Someone asked him a similar question. But they asked, why are things the way they are? And his answer, which I like very much, is things are the way they are because they were the way they were. There is this accumulation of, I mean, we can use the word karma in this crowd, but there's this karmic accumulation from the behaviors, the thoughts of an undeveloped humanity. We are, you know, as much as we like to think of ourselves as quite advanced and we can point to our scientific discoveries to confirm it. We are a childish, not childlike. We are a childish and as yet undeveloped humanity. If you need examples, probably any daily newspaper will suffice, but I find myself quoting this, it's a Native American expression that says, no tree that you see in nature, there is no tree so foolish that its branches would fight among themselves. You don't see that. But, again, the various fragments that we separate ourselves into of nationality necessarily finds itself in competition with those that are other fragments of nationality. I mean, and it's religion, it's all of the different things that separate us. There isn't a country in the world where you don't find differences in treatment according to gender. The fact that one soul inhabits one type of body, another inhabits another, creates a whole system of behavior, a caste system, the caste of gender. So, Theosophical society, initially, it's like a universal brotherhood, regardless of race, religion, caste, all of the different separating entities. We cling to those things, and we reap the results of a false sense that we act upon of separateness. And it continues so long as we continue with that incorrect assessment of reality. Many great people have come throughout humanity's history to try to remind us, not just that we're moving in the wrong way, but to point out a correct way. Universally, they have been unsuccessful in that attempt, but they keep coming. The point of a theosophical society is to make it known that such a thing as the ageless wisdom actually exists. And for those people who connect with it, there are new possibilities that they become aware of. How well we act upon it, that's up to us.
Okay. This will be the last question now coming, because the question asked by the gentleman, I received it before the session. So the question now, which will be read out by Krista, will be the last.
So the question is from Benoit. When Christ forgave sins, did he not invite people to act consciously? It seems like a realignment of life or a return to balance, a healing. What do you think about it?
Could you say the first part again? When?
You have it also under the questions and answers, but I'll repeat it. When Christ forgave sins, did he not invite people to act consciously? It seems like a realignment of life or a return to balance, a healing. What do you think about it?
Yeah, in the case of the healings that were done by the Christ, one of the things he would say is, you are healed, now go and sin no more. So basically the condition is relieved. So long as you have become conscious and cease from the activity that brought it into being, then you will be healed. So, this really is very similar to the question that was just asked. The conditions that we find ourselves in are related to the conditions that we are continually creating. You can create these conditions consciously, or you can create these conditions in an unconscious, conditioned manner. And that's the opportunity that really the Theosophy and the Theosophical Society tries to point toward, that we have a responsibility and we also have a capacity to heal.
All right. Thank you to Tim for all this time to participate in our event here. Thank you to the questioners giving us the opportunity to hear the diversity of the observation of the answering. And thank you, Tim, once again to be with us.
Certainly.
Far from a very distant location, but you are still with us for that. So then the session is over. And
Thank you all. Thank you.
soon, yes.
I will have breakfast in your honor.
Yeah. Yes, okay. So thank you and goodbye.